of the hour here on Pienaar and Friends. As you've been hearing, we've got a lot to talk about. Let's get started in just a moment or two's time here on Times Radio.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio, the voice of the Times.
It is 6 o'clock. I'm John Pienaar. Welcome to Pienaar and Friends, which tonight is Sienna Rodgers from the House Magazine at Westminster and ConservativeHome's Henry Hill. And you, I'm very happy to say, send me a text, send me a tweet, and we can chat very, very soon. Also, by the way, you're going to be talking to, among others, the Trade Minister Douglas Alexander, who's going to be joining us live. All of this after the news with James Kitchen.
Thank you, John. Good evening. Donald Trump's described the US-Canada border as an artificial line, but Mark Carney's again made it clear where his country stands on the president's desire for a 51st state.
It's not for sale, won't be for sale ever, but the opportunity is in the partnership.
Canada is stepping up the military participation, but never say never, never say never.
Minutes before Canada's Prime Minister arrived at the White House, the US President posted online that America doesn't need anything they have except their friendship. Mr. Trump's again insisted countries want to do trade deals with the US. Meanwhile, a free trade deal's been signed, described as the most ambitious since Brexit between the UK and India. It'll see a reduction in tariffs on cosmetics, gin and some clothes, with the Indian textile industry also to benefit. The Times' policy editor, Oliver Wright, says the biggest loser, though, might be the British taxpayer.
One of the key demands from the Indian side was that Indian companies who send workers to this country, whether they're sort of multinational firms or whether they're Indian firms operating in the UK, shouldn't have to pay employers' national insurance, and their employees shouldn't have to pay national insurance. Now, the government has conceded on that point, but I think politically that's quite difficult for them, because it's basically saying that an Indian company in the UK isn't going to be paying a tax which a British company is.
Meanwhile, Number 10 says it won't be swayed by calls urging it to change its mind on slashing winter fuel payments for millions of pensioners. Some ministers have been urging the government to rethink the policy following poor local election results. Friedrich Merz has become Germany's new chancellor after winning a second vote in the country's parliament. In what was a first for post-war Germany, he needed that second ballot to win, having failed to receive enough votes during the first round. The Conservative leader had been expected to sail through after securing a deal with the centre-left Social Democrats. The SDP MEP Tobias Kramer told Times Radio it's now time to move on.
I think in the end, it's not about any blame game. I think the important signal now is that we have managed, and a democracy did work out in the end, that on the same day we managed to have this coalition and have this clear majority. And I think this is what counts now, that we are capable of actually acting in this moment also of geopolitical threat in Europe and in Germany.
Israel's military says it struck and disabled Yemen's main airport at Sana'a. Witnesses reported at least one civilian aircraft was on fire. It comes a day after US and Israeli strikes devastated the major Hodeidah port, preventing fuel imports. The Times' correspondent is Gabriel Weiniger in Tel Aviv.
We have sources in Israel telling us that that port was completely wiped out. If that port has indeed been destroyed, it means that the Houthis won't be getting the supplies from Iran. And that's what Israel's looking to do, really, to stop that oxygen line, to cut them off from Iran, and to hold Iran responsible for any action they're taking.
And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on the Times Radio app.
Across the UK, on DAB digital radio, on the free Times Radio app, and via your smart speaker.
Pienaar and Friends on Times Radio with NatWest Cushion.
It is good to have you with us on Pienaar and Friends, an hour of good conversation in very good company. Tonight, that means Sienna Rodgers, the Deputy Editor at the House Magazine at Westminster. Hey, Sienna.
Hello.
It's great to have you back again. And the Deputy Editor of ConservativeHome here too, Henry Hill. Hello, Henry.
Good evening.
Can I start with you, Henry, for your thought for the day?
Well, I think actually it was just seeing this Labour visa story about them introducing more restrictive regimes to certain countries and being reminded once again that Labour so often seem just able and willing to do immediately things that the Conservative Party spends years agonising about and being worried to do because it wouldn't be a good look. You know, you think about cutting the winter fuel payment without not only did Rachel Reeves do it, but she did it without getting an impact assessment under the terms of the Equality Act. And for years, Conservative ministers would be like, well, we'd like to do X or Y, but we can't because of... And Labour showing, actually, you just can't.
Yeah. Mind you, previous Labour Prime Ministers, I mean, Gordon Brown went to India looking for trade deals. I mean, Tony Blair was there looking for trade deals. None of them got anything because it came unstuck over visas. That seemed to be the principal sticking point. But now they seem to have got this deal, which, you know, in the scheme of things, maybe not the biggest thing in the world, Sienna, but it counts for something.
Oh, this, yeah. I mean, there's a huge row going on already over this deal.
Tax concession, you mean?
Yes, exactly. So this, what's it called again? The
National Insurance?
Yes. But double contribution convention, that's it. And I mean, Labour MPs right now, there's a meeting of Red Wall caucus Labour MPs. So these are the exact kind who
That's going on now.
Right now. And I've got some texts coming in from it right now.
Well, let me just explain to people listening what we're talking about here. So the trade deal said to be worth something like £4.8 billion. We're going to talk to the Trade Minister, Douglas Alexander, about this in just a moment. We can all talk to Douglas. But this concerns an element of the deal, which means that, well, there's going to be a tax concession to Indians who are given a visa and leave to come to this country. They will not be subject to employers or employees' national insurance for their employment. It's a special concession. I'll let Douglas Alexander make his own case his own way. But as you say, it's obviously something given, maybe as part to sweeten the deal for this trade deal. And you're telling me now there's a lot of active unhappiness, not just on the Tory side, but on the Labour side too, Sienna.
Yes, so the Conservatives are saying, well, this was a sticking point and this is why we couldn't get the deal over the line. And yes, you can celebrate, this is the biggest deal since Brexit, etc., etc. But actually, this was the thing that we wouldn't accept and you've gone ahead and done it. Labour MPs are saying very similar things. One very loyal MP has been telling me that they think it's bonkers. Another one kind of just saying that this is brain dead of the government.
Yeah.
They're really angry.
You must have more. You're looking at your phone. What other texts have you got? Blistering texts from Labour MPs.
Yes, saying, I mean, one very loyal, usually just saying bonkers, sympathetic because this is very, very complex, but apparently the Home Office had no idea that this was happening. This is what's happening in this Red Wall meeting right now. This is what they're talking about, that the Home Office has been blindsided by this. So we'll see what happens when there's more fallout from this. But basically, the instant reaction is they have just been given an absolute walloping by Reform in these elections last week. And the next week, just days afterwards, the government has struck this deal that, of course, there's loads of good points to it. You know, slashing tariffs, especially cars, will be a focus because of what happened with the US. But this specific thing about it being cheaper to hire these Indian workers, maybe on a temporary basis, but cheaper than to hire British workers because of the employer's NI element. That's huge for these Labour MPs who are so aware of the Reform threat.
Well, you'll get a chance in a moment or two to put those concerns that you're picking up from Labour MPs directly to the Trade Minister, Douglas Alexander. But you mentioned in particular, Sienna, that some of this was coming maybe in particular from those so-called red wall seats, where we saw in the past a lot of concern about borders. This was an area that went for Boris Johnson, largely out of sympathy for the Brexit deal and wanted to get that done. And now we see, well, look, it went back to Labour pretty decisively at the general election in many of these red wall areas. But this is where the Reform UK Party scored so heavily just a few days ago in the local elections. And these MPs are basically worried about how they sell what will be presented as favourable treatment for Indian arrivals when some of their own people aren't getting the same sort of treatment. I guess it's a predictable row.
It's a really predictable row, and even the Liberal Democrats are criticising the government over this.
On what basis?
I just saw something come in about the Liberal Democrats saying, I'll get it up when I can, but basically everyone is going for the government on this issue right now. And I mean, ministers will be saying, well, we need to do this because of the US tariffs. There's loads of advantages. You're just picking up one tiny bit of the deal and making a huge deal of it. And, you know, don't focus on that part. And also, if you look at it in isolation, then it seems very fair that these Indian workers shouldn't pay social contributions both in India and in Britain.
Yeah.
That seems very fair, doesn't it?
There are reciprocal tax deals around the world.
Exactly, and India has this with lots and lots of countries. But if you look at the context, the political context right now, people are saying, well, this is, Treasury brain, this is them just not getting it. Keir Starmer saying, we get it.
Yeah.
And MPs are telling me right now, Labour MPs, that this is proof that he doesn't get it if they're willing to make this kind of deal.
Getting back into that familiar, political debate territory of it's never mind the reality, it's the perception that matters. But
Exactly.
the reality matters too. Henry, you were feeling quite warm towards this.
Was I? No, God no. I think the challenge
but you did respect the trade deal with India.
I think a trade deal with India is good for Britain as it goes. Generally speaking, anything that boosts exports is nice, but it's not only the national insurance point. Right? And that is a concern, because it means that fundamentally you're creating an unequal playing field that favours a certain category of foreign worker. But the other thing the government has apparently done is made it easier for these people to bring dependents.
Right.
And I haven't seen the detail of how many dependents or whatever, but that's one of the big stealth things in a lot of these immigration deals, is that we say we're going to bring in X number of skilled workers or students until recently. And then along with them, they bring in a lot of dependents who end up often net drags on the exchequer.
Yes.
And then that means that the headline figures about the contribution of these workers to the economy are complete fiction.
Yes. Right. Now let's then talk about another deal. It hasn't yet been announced. It hasn't yet been. It hasn't had the wax seal planted upon it. But Matt Dathan in the Times gives us exclusive news of this, and that is some sort of deal now in the making when it comes to visas for those coming from Pakistan and from Sri Lanka and from Nigeria. And these are the areas apparently identified as countries where people will come to this country on a student or a work visa and then maybe stay and then maybe seek asylum in this country. And the government, we're told thanks to Matt Dathan in the Times, the government is now looking at just making it tougher to get those visas in the first place, Henry. Now, we're going to talk to Douglas Alexander in a minute, and you can give us a bit of a conservative side perspective on all of that. But when it comes to clamping down on those visas from Pakistan, Nigeria and Sri Lanka, isn't that what Conservatives would want to hear?
I'd have thought so. It's the kind of thing that, frankly, we should have done. There's a tension. Fundamentally, critics of policies like this say that it is potentially unfair on individual prospective migrants, that they end up being penalised because of a collective problem. But the job of the immigration system is not to be fair to each individual person. It is to ensure an overall benefit to Britain. And if you do have clear evidence that certain visa routes are causing problems, or certain countries of origin are causing problems, you should target things at them. The thing that brings this to mind is a couple of years ago there was a big row for the Conservatives about changing the spousal visa threshold.
Yes.
Right. But the reason that spousal visa threshold existed in the first place at the level it was at is because there had been a specific problem from a handful of countries, which I think includes some of the ones you just named, about abuse of the spousal visa. But because it would have been, quote-unquote, discriminatory to target a regime at those countries, instead we all ended up lumbered with a universal spousal visa that was quite high. So actually targeted intervention based on statistics and evidence is a better way of running your immigration system, because, again, the purpose of the immigration system is not to give a perfectly fair shot to anyone who wants to come here. It is to ensure the overall mix benefits this country.
All right, we're going to be joined by Douglas Alexander, the Trade Minister, in just a minute. As you can hear there, I think between the three of us, we're going to have quite a few questions to put to Douglas Alexander. And you too. Look, what do you want to hear from Douglas Alexander, the Trade Minister? Send me a text. We'll chuck that into the mix as well as your own views. I think we're also on YouTube this evening. So look, remember that. You can see us as well as hear us whenever you like. Always like your company in whatever form, but we're here for you, whether in vision or in audio, all for you here on Pienaar and Friends in association with NatWest Cushion, making workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Times Radio Market. ConservativeHome.com.
Workplace pensions and savings easy. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
So Henry Hill from Conservative Home is here with me. So is Sienna Rodgers from the House Magazine at Westminster. We're waiting for now Douglas Alexander, the Trade Minister, to join us here on Pienaar and Friends. We can all have a chat to Douglas. We'd love to have him in this part of the show, Pienaar and Friends, where we just have a conversation around the table. It's all very informal. If you ask what the plan is, there's never a plan. We make it up as we go along, as Douglas Alexander will no doubt find out. And let me just round that home by just harking back for a moment to what we saw in its own way, an extraordinary scene in the White House. We waited for the Canadian leader, Mark Carney, to arrive at the White House and talk to Donald Trump, which was after weeks of Donald Trump saying he meant to grab hold of, one way or another, by hook or by crook, Canada. He wanted it to become the 51st state, whether it seemed the Canadians liked it or not. And believe me, they did not like that idea one bit. It's one reason why Mark Carney overturned the polls and expectations and is now the Prime Minister of Canada. So when the subject came up in conversation during the preliminary news conference in the Oval Office, well, Donald Trump's tone was just curiously difficult. Now, the meaning of what we are about to hear, I'll just give you an extract of that in just a second. The meaning of that we can talk about and we'll do in just a moment's time. What it did tell us is you never know what is going to come out of the mouth of the President of the United States. After all of that tension, which has led, by the way, to 40% of Canadians viewing America as in the category of an enemy, suddenly it was much more sweetness and light. And I will come on to some of the more substantial issues which are still there in the air. But as far as the relationship and the tone and the atmosphere, what a transformation. When we heard Donald Trump, after saying that he meant to grab hold of Canada, just so useful and valuable to America, he was telling everyone just a moment or two ago that it takes two to tango. In other words, there'd be no grabbing hold of Canada without Canada liking it. Makes the point, Henry and Sienna, you never know with that guy, do you?
You really never know. I mean, it's funny, really, because obviously it's very easy to criticise Trump, right? He's very unconventional. The way he does things is very distasteful a lot of the time. But he keeps saying, well, he was saying before this meeting, I didn't even know why we're having this meeting, but I suppose he wants to come and get a deal because everyone wants a deal with me. And I mean, it's true to some extent that all these leaders, including Keir Starmer, definitely going over to the White House and just being basically fawning over the president because of his unreasonable and unpredictable behaviour. The way they talk to him, the way they behave towards him is staggering in just how kind of saccharine it is. And I mean, interesting that this has gone very differently to that Zelensky meeting, obviously, that infamously went incredibly wrong. Yeah,
well, this time around, Henry Hill, it was practically President Trump fawning over Mark Carney. He told us that he considered him to be a good man, a talented man who had fought a great campaign in the election, which, by the way, was largely directed against Donald Trump himself. And there he was, just heaping praise on this man and saying, look, you tell me I said I wanted Canada, it takes two to tango. So, let's just put all of that behind us. The lesson for Keir Starmer is, I don't know, what's the lesson for Keir Starmer?
There isn't a lesson, right? I mean, the thing with Trump is that I feel like you just have to sort of cross-reference what he said with the I Ching to try and work. Take a quote: "Fire under heaven." He woke up on the right side of the bed this morning. Maybe he thinks that Carney's going to continue the liberal trajectory of running Canada's economy into the ground and make it that much bit easier to take. But fundamentally, The Republican Party has for decades been sternly opposed to allowing Puerto Rico to become a US state, despite the fact that it has voted to do so twice because they think it would vote Democrat. So the odds of them adding 15 Democrat provinces and Alberta to the United States was always a complete fantasy anyway.
I mean, I think some people would say the lesson you can take from this is Keir can go over there and actually stand up to Trump and be much tougher, and it doesn't make much of a difference, right? That's what some people would take from it. But I think Canada's in a very different position in terms of the economics.
Look, Douglas Alexander, the Trade Minister, now joins us live on the line. Welcome to the programme, Douglas.
Good afternoon.
It's great to hear. Look, there's so much we want to talk to you about, but I just briefly want to get your thoughts. If you form thoughts on the meeting going on now between the leader of Canada and the President of the United States, I know they were like a pair of purring pussycats. I mean, do you take any heart from that?
Honestly, I have seen a fleeting image of Mark Carney sitting in the Oval Office as I stepped through the Sky Studios into the Times radio studio. So I tend to take an approach of saying I want to know the facts before I try and answer any questions. So you'll have to tell me how the meeting's going, John.
Yeah. Well, it couldn't have been more cordial. Donald Trump... look, I need to qualify this point by saying that when Donald Trump spoke about wanting to take possession of Canada, it was always an absurdity. That was never even remotely realistic. It did have the very real effect of souring relations between America and its nearest neighbour to the north and turning a large part of the Canadian population dead against America to the point that trade, at least certainly tourism, into America plummeted. Sales of American goods plummeted. You have to wonder what on earth was all of that about. But anyway, look, I'm going to park that there. We're just expressing our thoughts on what we've just been witnessing. Where you're concerned, I suppose, Douglas, you don't have a trade deal with America just at the moment, do you? And that's going to be hard to get, especially hard to balance with the deal you really want, which is one with the European Union.
Well, listen, we're continuing to talk to our friends, partners and neighbours in the European Union, and of course we're continuing to talk with our allies in the United States. But why I'm in the studio today, I think, is not just to give you what's inevitably a very limited commentary on those continuing discussions, but on what we've achieved, which is the biggest and most significant bilateral trade deal since Brexit, which is a UK-India trade deal.
And look, and in fairness, I will move on that because you are that's what you're armed with. You didn't watch what happened in the White House. That trade deal with India. Why is it such a good thing for this country? What's it actually going to add up to?
Well, if you look at the size of our respective economies, we're respectively the 5th and 6th largest economies in the world. India has the highest growth rate in the G20, but also some of the highest tariffs in the G20. So what we've seen, for example, on whisky and gin tariffs, critically important in my own home nation of Scotland, we'll see those tariffs halved for India from 150% down to 75% before reducing to 40%.
Yes.
So whether it is in spirits and in whisky, whether it is in automotives, whether it is in a whole range of products, what we've seen today, frankly, is a landmark deal between the United Kingdom and India in a global trading context that your initial question alluded to, which is pretty tough for trade deals.
Yes.
So in that sense, there's been a huge amount of quiet, painstaking, pragmatic work been undertaken to get us to the point today where Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Starmer were able to agree this document.
And you've done this without giving great concessions to India by way of access to the country via visas, which has been the stumbling block to an Indian trade deal for so long under so many leaders.
That's right. I mean, we took, as I say, a pretty pragmatic but clear-eyed census to where the national interest lay. Jonathan Reynolds, the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, went out and met his counterpart, Minister Goyal, in February. As a consequence of that, we were able to quite rapidly close services and goods chapters, which meant we were then able to make that final push over the line.
Right.
As you say, the deal doesn't affect the points-based system of the UK's immigration system. Our immigration system is dealt with separately. The deal actually only covers business mobility. That's temporary travel for business purposes.
Yeah, OK, so far so good. But you joined us, Douglas, just as our colleague Sienna Rodgers from the House Magazine was telling us about the reaction that's going on at Westminster now. As you speak to me, we speak to our listeners. A lot of Labour MPs, Sienna, they're not happy, are they?
They're not happy. So, Douglas, to let you know that there is this Red Wall caucus meeting of MPs going on at the moment, and a big topic of discussion of their frustrations is this backlash against this double contribution convention, so exempting Indian workers from paying social security emergency contributions while they're here so they don't have to pay it twice. But a lot of people pointing out that makes it cheaper for employers to employ them over British workers. Labour MPs are telling me that this is bonkers, that it shows the government is brain dead. Some of these are sometimes very loyal Labour MPs, and they say that the Home Office has been blindsided about this. So what's your defence? What's your response to those MPs?
So the defence is these are not Indian workers in large numbers coming over and taking UK jobs. These are Indian workers who are employed by Indian businesses, coming over here often for relatively short periods, which is why they don't trigger the visa system. But instead we have arrangements in place which allow a contribution to be made on a temporary basis by people who are still employed by Indian companies and often on the basis of intercompany transfers or choosing for a limited period to be spending time in the United Kingdom.
Right, so you feel these Labour MPs who Sienna tells us his phone seems to be buzzing with texts from your Labour colleagues. You're telling us that they're getting into a bit aerated about very little.
Well, understandably, when a deal is concluded at about 12:30, which is when the agreement was reached between the two Prime Ministers, between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Starmer, of course there is more detail that will emerge, not just today, but in the coming days. It's understandable if people have concerns that those concerns need to be addressed. But the reality is the Double Contribution Convention reflects the fact that there are existing social security arrangements by the United Kingdom in place, for example, with the United States, for example, with the European Union. And we're clear that this is in relation to people who are employed by Indian companies working temporarily for a limited period within the United Kingdom, given the arrangements that are in place.
OK, now Henry Hill is also here from ConservativeHome. He can help us with how this will look from the Conservative side and what's coming your way from the opposition. Henry.
Well, a cynic might point out that given the vote at last election and where the Conservative Party seats are, an Indian immigration deal is the one that they might actually have wanted. One other aspect of this is that apparently, from what I've seen, this deal is going to make it easier for these people to bring dependents into the country. Will those dependents, and I don't know, will those dependents have access to public funds? And has any estimate been made of the burden that might place on the Exchequer?
No, the UK's points-based immigration system is not affected, and our immigration system is dealt with separately by the agreement that is separately from the agreement that has been reached today. What is being discussed today is temporary business mobility, temporary travel for business purposes, and therefore it's in a completely different category from some of the concerns that have been raised historically as to whether we would see a significant increase in the number of visas being issued.
Yeah, just a word from you then on Henry. You happy with that?
Well, I was just going to say, Andrew Griffith, for a Conservative MP, is saying that it will make it easier for them to have dependents. Are you saying that he's got that wrong? He seems to be having screenshots from the trade deal.
I haven't seen Andrew Griffiths today, to be honest. I was expecting him to be in the chamber at the dispatch box, but for whatever reason, the Shadow Secretary of State was preoccupied.
I can quote for you if you like. The FTA eases mobility for professionals, including partners and dependent children of intra-corporate transferees with the right to work. So, will those people have access to public funds, and what impact would that have?
I am not clear on what basis Andrew Griffiths is making his statements today, given he wasn't in the chamber.
That is a quote from the government document.
And as I say, he's perfectly entitled to a point of view. What I'm telling you is that the UK immigration system, the points-based system, is not affected. And indeed, our immigration system is dealt with separately from the free trade agreements, and that's well understood.
OK, I'm going to have to park this one there for the moment. I'm guessing there'll be statements to the House where there'll be more questions.
I've just done a statement to the House, actually. That was what I was observing, that Andrew Griffiths didn't turn up.
OK, fair enough. OK, but there will be questions in the air, if not actually on the floor of the House. It is a significant story, as you point out. Douglas Alexander, Trade Minister, thank you for joining us this evening.
Many thanks.
Now, guys, last thoughts on this before we break for the news. Still questions there that you've aired some of them. There's also a big strategic question here too when it comes to India's relationship, with this country in the light of China and Russia and the changing trade picture being rewritten by Donald Trump.
Yeah, and I imagine that might have been what helped to unlock the visa block, which was previously an absolute sticking point. And there is no doubt that one of the potential advantages for everyone except America of Donald Trump throwing grenades at the America-oriented global trading system is that people will start looking for alternatives. But of course, the challenge is, I will just make clear to listeners, it wasn't a quote from Andrew Griffiths I was giving. He has got a screenshot of the official document that the government has put out. And that was what I read from about dependents. So open question there.
Okay, well, you put it to the minister. We heard what Douglas Alexander had to say. After the news, we're going to go stateside and talk to Sarah Baxter about the story there, which just keeps on moving. Got a lot of questions. I'm not sure we got quite as many answers as questions, but we're going to talk about it. Also going to be talking to the mayor of Winnipeg. What does she make about the conversation between her leader and Donald Trump? We are streaming, let me just say again, live on YouTube, if you want to watch as well as listen in. Now, though, it's 6:30, so let us go on time for a change to the news with James Kitchen.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart speaker. This is Times Radio.
Thank you, John. Good evening. India and the UK have agreed a trade deal described by both sides as ambitious. India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi says the landmark agreement will help with investment, growth, job creation and innovation in both countries. The deal's been criticised in some quarters here as it will essentially make it cheaper for British companies to hire Indian workers because of a tax exemption. But Sir Keir Starmer has hailed the deal as a positive result for working people.
I'm really pleased for working people across the country who will feel the benefits of this, of course, at an increasingly uncertain time in terms of trade and the economy across the world. So this is a very significant step, and I'm very pleased that we've got this far with this really significant trade agreement.
There were smiles and handshakes as Canada's Prime Minister arrived at the White House. Donald Trump's again refused to rule out turning the country into the 51st US state, but Mark Carney's adamant Canada is not for sale. The Prime Minister here has rejected claims his government's considering a U-turn over its decision to strip winter fuel payments from millions of pensioners. The Labour Welsh First Minister's among those calling for a rethink of policy in England and Wales. And Friedrich Merz has become Germany's new Chancellor after winning a second vote in the country's parliament. The Conservative leader unexpectedly failed in the first parliamentary ballot this morning. And for a news bulletin when you want it, search for the Times News Briefing on any podcast platform.
This is Times Radio.
Conservative Chairman Lord Ashcroft, who has got an amazing collection of Victorian George crosses, and he wants to see if there's a way of keeping them open to the public for as long as possible. They're at the Imperial War Museum at the moment, but they are saying it's time to bring it to a close. He'd like it to go on a bit longer.
Right. Okay. Interesting stuff with you as always, Karen. Looking forward to that. So right here, Henry Hill, Sienna Rodgers. I'm here, John Pienaar on Pienaar and Friends. We've been joined now from Canada by, well, we're going to be talking to Scott, who is the Mayor of Winnipeg, Scott Gillingham. Hello to you, Scott.
Good morning, or good afternoon. For me, it's good afternoon, John, but to you all your listeners, good evening. Great to be with you. Thank you.
Good evening to you, Scott. I mean, you would have been watching, I'm sure, your new leader, Mark Carney, talking to the president in the Oval Office. That conversation is still going on over lunch, where they are. That we had no idea really what to expect. We did not expect quite the outburst of cordiality that we subsequently saw. And the president was asked in their sort of pre-lunch press conference, what about everything he'd had to say about Canada becoming the 51st state? And then he said this.
Well, I still believe that, but it takes two to tango, right? But no, I do. I mean, I believe it would be a massive tax cut for the Canadian citizens. You get free military, you get tremendous medical cares and other things. There would be a lot of advantages but it would be a massive tax cut.
Well, there it was. I mean, that was Donald Trump letting go of the idea of effectively Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. He went on to tell us how much he loved Canada, how much he admired Mark Carney, who was a good man and a talented man who'd run a great campaign. What did you make of it, Scott?
Well, the president's been talking about, wanting to make Canada the 51st state for some time now. He's dreaming of it. Some dreams never come true. This one will not come true for him because there is no way we are going to become the 51st state.
Yeah.
And Canadians writ large have no interest in being, the 51st state. And certainly our Prime Minister, thankfully, has made that very clear to the president as well.
Yeah.
What we have to do, I believe, our Prime Minister Carney is trying to do that, is to, where we can, reestablish the trading relationship. We do have a trading agreement. The CUMS, as it's called, the Canada, U.S., Mexico trade agreement. There's an established framework there that perhaps could be modified and adjusted if necessary to meet some of our goals. But, John, this is also an opportunity for Canada to really start looking beyond the United States for trading partners. Obviously, Europe, UK, all through Europe are great opportunities, I think, for us as a nation to look for other places to sell our product to and bring product in from and establish a stronger trading ties with other nations beyond the United States.
Yeah, it needs to be said that although the tone of the conversation became, rapidly, almost disconcertingly warmer, you still have the very real issue of tariffs, of trade tariffs. And just a couple of days ago, we saw Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary of the United States, telling us that there was no reason for America to make cars in Canada at all. No reason for films to be made in Canada at all. Those tariff barriers are still there. Still a worry for you and people like you in your city.
They are. What we're worried about here, John, I'm mayor of the city of Winnipeg. We're geographically in the center of Canada, a population of 850,000 people. We have businesses here that are being affected by the tariffs. My concern as mayor is jobs and paychecks and the impact on our local economy here in the city of Winnipeg. And I share that concern with my mayoral colleagues all across Canada.
Yes.
So we really do need our Prime Minister to work hard. I believe he is working hard to do all he can to reduce or ultimately eliminate those tariffs because it is impacting businesses and business investment across Canada.
Will that curious warmth in the Oval Office do anything to just take some of the steam out of the situation, to make Canadians feel a bit less hostile towards America and the president?
I think, the frustration that Canadians have, or I'll speak as one Canadian, as a mayor, what I hear in my city, is directed, frankly, at the president, not at the American population. Because in speaking to many of my mayoral colleagues in the United States, they're sympathetic to the impact on Canada and on Canadians of what the Prime Minister is talking about, or probably the president's talking about. But it's also Americans and American cities that are impacted by these tariffs. For example, a U.S. putting tariffs on softwood lumber drives up the cost of housing starts and development in the United States at a time where they need housing. Yes. And so when I speak to U.S. mayors, they are equally concerned with and have called upon the president to eliminate and end the tariffs.
And the fall off in visits by Canadians into the United States has been really dramatic, hasn't it?
It really has, John. And in fact, you take a look at our own city of Winnipeg, our advertising, our tourism campaign right now is calling upon other Canadians to visit Canadian cities, specifically visit Winnipeg. And so there is a reduction in the number of Canadians going to the United States for vacations, or they're limiting even their business travel where possible. So there's a real financial impact that the United States is experiencing right now because of the tariffs.
It's great to have you with us, Scott. Henry Hill is here with me in the studio. So Sienna Rodgers. Henry.
Hi. Slightly broader question, and I'm not asking this in a partisan sense because I know you're independent, but how do you feel about the fact that in your recent general election, for the first half of the campaign, there was obviously the polls were going one way, but that was in part because the Conservative Party of Canada led on the cost of living and lots of other bread and butter issues. And by the end of the campaign, which it ended up losing, it still led on most of those issues. So is it obviously you have a large neighbour and there's not much you can do about it, but is it a bit depressing that you could end up having an entire federal election decided not on who's going to look after the average, especially the average younger Canadian, but who's going to stand up to a foreign head of state?
Well, Henry, that is the nature of politics, isn't it? Everything can be tracked in one way, and the issues can be, at the top of the charts. But then something like, the President of the United States coming in with the rhetoric he's brought in and tariffs, and everything changes. And the election completely changed, as you said. I think, though, beyond President Donald Trump and the issue of tariffs and trade, those other issues you talk about, Henry, are still there. Affordability. Crime and safety in our community, in all of our communities. Those are still issues that have not gone away. They're still very present issues that we still must have our federal politicians, acknowledging and fighting for Canadians on.
Sienna Rodgers.
Do you think there's any lessons for the UK in terms of what has happened today with this discussion between Trump and Carney?
Well, I would hope as a Canadian that the UK would be very open to new and expansive trading relationships with Canada. But of course, the president has not only targeted Canada. It seems that almost every nation he's traded with, the United States trades with in the world, has been in his sights. And so I think, broadening our respective trading relationships is important, and then continuing to stand for one another. I mean, here in Canada, we're a hockey nation. We use the term elbows up all the time. And if you know anything about hockey, you get into the corners and the elbows come up a little bit and it gets a little rough. And we have said, it's time for us to stand up for ourselves. We're going to stand up for ourselves. We're not going to be bullied as a nation. And so I think having like-minded nations who will stand for democracy, freedom, integrity, and liberty are what we really should bind all of us together in our like-mindedness.
Right. Sienna used that reference to elbows. I had no idea what she was talking about, but now it turns out she's talking about ice hockey. So I've learned something this evening. Scott Gillingham of Winnipeg, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to be joined. You all. Good to have you here. We're going to be joined in a minute by Sarah Baxter from New York City. Her thoughts on what's going on in the White House and what's still going to be happening, because presumably they're going to reappear really quite soon, and we'll hear another news conference from the two of them. What if we'll learn more? What if there's any more just astonishing news to come out? It's even money, maybe even better than that we will. This is Pienaar Friends on Times Radio in association with NatWest Cushion, putting your employees in control of their financial future. Search NatWest Cushion to find out more.
Wake up.
Pienaar Rodgers and Henry Hill. We've got Sarah Baxter now on the line from New York City from the Mary Colvin Centre for International Reporting. Hello to you, Sarah. Welcome back.
Hello there, John.
What did you make of what we've just been seeing in the White House, Sarah?
Well, firstly, kudos to Mark Carney. He didn't get berated as President Zelensky unfortunately did. I think Canadians were worried he was going to be sent packing with a flea in his ear, but of course Trump treated him respectfully, even if he didn't give up his ultimate ambition to make Canada a 51st state. Because nobody has more reason to be grateful to Donald Trump than Mark Carney. He probably wouldn't be Prime Minister today were it not for Trump's inflammatory statements. And I think the two had a certain grudging mutual respect.
Yeah, well, more than I imagined I was going to see before they actually sat down together. We'll see how that survives another encounter in front of the media, maybe before too long, Sarah. But still, though, we still have the question of tariffs, and that's no small question. And no great advance on that question where Canada is concerned or anyone else, although the president did tell us, well, he said, or claimed, I should say, that China had been on the line looking for a meeting. Last time, I think the president talked about China looking for a deal. China said, news to us.
Yeah, well, as ever with Donald Trump, you can sort of trust, but you have to verify. And so when he claimed this before, as you rightly say, the Chinese denied it. But Trump continues to boast that every country is looking to make a deal. And of course, that's true of Canada, and it's probably true of China as well. It's certainly true of the UK. And even with regard to Canada, Trump was saying, well, never say never to a deal. So everybody knows he's going to have to sort of back down from his high horse to some extent. How much, we don't know. But ports are being drained of goods at the moment. They're standing empty.
Yes.
Ports on the West Coast, in Seattle and Los Angeles that face China, ports like New Jersey that face Europe, trade is beginning to grind to a halt. And something has to be done. Everybody recognises that.
Yeah, I mean, look, Sienna Rodgers and Henry Hill, keen to get them in as well. I'm sure they've got thoughts to bounce off you and get thoughts out of you. But where are we with this process of getting deals done, Sarah? I mean, I was there in Washington, D.C. just at the end of last week. And last thing I remember was hearing Donald Trump tell us that he had 200 trade deals on the go with 200 countries. Now, leave aside the fact that there are only 195 countries on the face of the planet. He was
even counting the Penguin Islands.
I think, even including the Penguin Islands, you don't get to 200. But leave that aside for a moment. Is there any sign that you can see of movement on this front, apart from a lot of talk and a lot of people who want a deal? Sure.
Yeah, well, the clock is ticking because Trump has also promised deals within 90 days. There's a suspension until then. We've heard talk of a deal in the offing this week. So let's see if that actually happens. Top of the list appeared to be South Korea and Japan, and maybe India. I'm not sure which one Trump is referring to when he's talking about a deal this week. But, there's a long way to go before he signs all 200, taking his figure as the gospel truth there. And really, if it comes to the end of 90 days without much progress, the stock market's going to take another nosedive. At the moment, it's been recovering. Yeah, the markets have been pretty healthy looking for the last few days. And these days, that is saying quite a lot. Sienna and Henry are here. Sienna.
Yeah, I mean, in the latest edition of the House Magazine, we had an interesting article by the economist Tim Lernig, who kind of gave his advice as to how everyone should react to the US tariffs. And he said, basically, Canada's in this very strong position because of oil and electricity and the Keystone Pipeline, meaning that some Americans can get oil very cheaply. And basically, Canada can and should impose a tax on oil exports to the US, hit them where it hurts. It's in this strong position, use it, and do an export charge also on electricity. But the position for the UK and for Europe is so much harder that basically all we can do here is wait it out. He can't run again and just hope that it gets better after his term has ended. Yeah. I mean, would you agree with that, Sarah? What do you think?
Well, I would. I'd add the word of caution that Canada doesn't want to get too aggressive. It wants to. I think Mark Carney does have some cards to play, but he really would rather not deploy them. He would rather to an agreement because 75% of Canada's trade is with the US, so there would be suffering on both sides. I think. We have to wait and see what the American public think of this. They don't like tariffs. I think it is dawning on them that Trump was wrong about them not being taxes. But at the same time, Trump is promising the American voters tax cuts.
Yes.
And everybody likes a tax cut. And Trump says these beautiful tariffs are going to pay for beautiful tax cuts. So there is pain, but will there be gain? If there are a few trade agreements with some key countries and Trump does implement tax cuts, will he be in a much more favourable position in the coming months.
Yeah, well, look, a few trade deals might help to just keep the markets a little bit steadier for a little bit longer, but they're not going to do very much to provide the kind of revenue that Trump needs to pay for the tax cuts that he wants to see, and that is still going on on Capitol Hill, isn't it? Those talks are actually underway now. Inside the House of Representatives, inside the Senate, and you've got different Republican factions. Leave aside the Democrats for a moment, but the different factions inside the Republican Party, they still haven't got to an agreement on what these tax cuts should look like and how they're going to be paid for, Sarah.
Well, that's right. But then you've got the old remnants of the Republican Party that believe in having, balanced budgets and all that. And then you've got Trump, who's run his whole life, his whole business on overinflating stuff. I mean, that's what the whole court case in New York was about regarding the Trump Organization, which, by the way, he still faces a large fine over that. But let's just park that for a moment. But that's because he said, he vastly over-borrowed in terms of what his assets represented. And he wants to do that with the American economy. He would be perfectly happy to blow the gaskets on the deficit in order to give people tax cuts. So that's the argument playing out now.
What are you thinking, Henry?
Given his position on American entanglements in the world, which is sort of a reversion to pre-Woodrow Wilson American isolationism, what are the odds of him angling for defence cuts to help to pay for these tax cuts? Because theoretically, if his complaint is that America has been paying for European defence and he wants to stop doing that, there would logically be a dividend there in the form of being able to reduce American defence expenditure accordingly. So is this something that's on the table in Republican circles?
Yeah, they definitely want to make defence cuts. They think they're spending too much on defending the rest of the world, including Canada and the UK, I should add, and that everybody else needs to step up. And I think Mark Carney offered to. We haven't got the details, but I think he did offer some security deals at the White House. So, yes, Pete Hegseth, by the way, has ordered some sort of 20% cut in the generals at the and I don't know whether that's to get rid of non-MAGA types and install more favourable ones or to make cuts. They're also talking about reducing the Pentagon federal workforce. So they're definitely looking for savings there, that's for sure. I mean, as everybody knows, the defence industry is a very bloated for years they've overinflated costs. Things have, not been overseen properly. Stuff has got out of control. So to some extent, bringing defence expenditure under control, if done sensibly, which I add that caveat, could be a very good thing for America because, the Pentagon is really one of the most unaccountable places in the world.
And meanwhile, we heard. Well, just as Israel was telling us about their raid on Sana'a airport in Yemen, there was the president just about an hour ago telling us that the Houthis in Yemen had basically thrown in the towel. There'd be no more need for further American airstrikes. And remember that those airstrikes on the Houthis a few days ago were joined by the Royal Air Force, by British military as well. And Donald Trump told us, okay, no, we're fine with them. They're not going to do any more attacks on shipping in the Red Sea. No need for any more of that. That came right out of the blue, Sarah.
Yeah, well, if I was a shipping captain, I wouldn't be setting sail just yet.
Okay.
With full confidence that the Houthis have given up the fight. They say they haven't. I mean, that remains to be seen. But it feels a bit like one of Trump's sort of wish fulfillment statements, rather like the war in Ukraine, where one side is altogether willing to make a deal, i.e. Ukraine, but Russia isn't and is paying no attention to what's going on in the Trump White House.
Are you telling us, Sarah, that, because I didn't spot this while we were in here talking, are you saying the Houthis have rebutted President Trump's claim that they've run up a flag of truce?
Okay, to be honest, I'm not 100% clear of the timeline, who said what when, but the Houthis today have given no indication that they're about to suspend fighting, as far as I can see from breaking news.
Yeah. We can all be forgiven for being confused.
Verify. Yeah, I'm not sure that's 100% accurate as of now. But I think the Houthis are reserving the right to strike.
Yeah, I suppose we can assume that may well be the case. What do we make? We don't know. But in the last few moments of the program, what do we make of the president's promise of the biggest announcement we've seen in years to come either Thursday or Friday, or when he's off on his trip to the Emirates and Saudi Arabia and Qatar? What on earth could he mean, do you think, Henry?
Well, just throw a dart at something, because again he uses the hyperbole
I mean,
so much.
he may not know himself.
Well, exactly. He uses the hyperbole so much for starters that you simply never know. It might simply be that a new Trump golf course is opening somewhere. Not completely impossible. But I suspect, given what his base is, it might be probably something to do with foreign affairs, maybe a breakthrough in the Russia-Ukraine situation. But honestly, I just have no idea. I keep having to say this when people ask about Trump. That most of the time, our job is decoding things, explaining things that might seem a bit mysterious on the surface. But with Trump, honestly, who knows?
I mean, sometimes the most useful answer you can give as a journalist and a commentator and an analyst is I've no idea. Because it establishes that no one has any informed or sensible idea.
Basically, I have no idea. No. I mean, he said that the announcement's coming like sometime later this week or maybe Monday. I mean, it's all so vague that it can't possibly be something to do with Ukraine or anything like that, because that would be too long term for that.
It would be odd, Sarah, to hold on until the eve of a trip to the Middle East and the Gulf states, and then make an announcement about Ukraine, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an announcement about the Middle East. I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know more than any of your panel, really. But let's face it, one of Trump's proudest achievements was the Abraham Accords in his first administration. Yes. There was some recognition of Israel. Now, I don't think that's going to happen because it's too awkward for the Saudis, but maybe there's going to be about investment in Gaza. Maybe there's going to be some big deal that is related to a very difficult situation in the Middle East.
He's got that resort
Obviously, Israel is ramping up the pressure on the Palestinians at the moment.
Yes.
I think there might be some hostage releases, but just watch this space. Let's not get carried away.
Yeah, and also I suppose you've got to say, if Donald Trump has news and he's saying he's going to sit on it for 2 or 3 days, I mean, how would that be even possible? I mean, you would think if there was news to come out of out of Tel Aviv, or for that matter out of Gaza, you think they would be there, not waiting for Donald Trump to decide when it suits him to get it onto the front pages and the top of the news bulletins.
Which means it must be some sort of Trump idea. It must be a project of his, because otherwise it would have to come out now.
Yeah. Look, he's done it again though, hasn't he? He's got us all talking about an announcement. We don't even know what the announcement is. Well, we're talking about Donald Trump making an announcement, whatever that may turn out to be. Whatever this guy does, this president of the United States, Sarah, he manages to keep a firm grip on the news agenda, unlike anyone any of us have quite seen.
It's not just a news agenda with Donald Trump. It's a whole reality show.
Yeah.
It's about box office. He wants the whole world talking about him, and we're certainly gratifying him. I mean, we need to. What he says really matters.
Yes.
And he does like to keep us on the edge of our seats.
Well, okay, we'll give him that, whatever else. Sarah, lovely to talk to you. Do come back and talk to us again soon. We're going to be on the phone, whatever happens. Sienna Rodgers, lovely to see you come back likewise and join us in the studio. Henry Hill, thanks for coming in. And thank you to you for listening. Our producer today was Angus Mitchell, and our technical operator was Ida Marley. I'm going to be back in this chair tomorrow, same time, same channel, which is Times Radio. And coming up next, Carolyn Quinn, who's in for Kate Borsey.
Across the UK, on DAB, online and on your smart